I used to think silence kept the peace. Now I know it was the rope they used to pull me deeper into their expectations. The night everything changed didn't begin with shouting or drama or any of the storms people expect in the stories like mine. It began with something much quieter, the sound of cutlery tapping faintly against porcelain, and my father clearing his throat as if preparing to deliver a company-wide announcement instead of speaking to his daughter. I remember the dim lighting above the dining table, the warm glow softened by the fragrance of roasted butter and rosemary. Thanksgiving at the Hart house always looked perfect. It was the people inside who weren't. My name is Riley Hart. I'm 29 years old, a medical receptionist. A woman who learned too early how to be useful and too late how to be free. And on that Thanksgiving night, while the turkey cooled between us and steam curled lazily from my mother's wineglass, my life split cleanly into a before and an after. Before I continue my story, let me ask you something. What would you do if the people you love most suddenly decided your entire life belonged to them? Would you watch in silence? Or would you finally stand up for yourself? Share your honest opinion in the comments. I truly want to hear your perspective. I felt it the moment my father stopped eating, folded his napkin, and looked at me with the rehearsed calm of someone about to deliver a verdict. "Riley," he said, "your sister is meant to enjoy her life. You know that. You, on the other hand, your job is to hold things together." My mother nodded lightly. My sister smiled the way a person does when they already know the answer to a question you never got to ask. And my father finished it with the sentence that still echoes in my memory, like something dropped into a deep well. "If you don't like your role in this family, there's the door." I think some people expect me to say I cried, or raised my voice, or stormed out dramatically. But betrayal doesn't always come like a fire. Sometimes it arrives like a breeze so cold it freezes you in place. In that moment, I felt every year I had spent paying their bills, covering their debts, and sacrificing my own life tighten around my throat like a scarf pulled too hard. My breath was shallow, but my mind was very still. There was no anger yet, no pain, just clarity. And so I did the simplest thing I'd ever done. I set down my fork, looked at all three of them, and said, "Fine." That one word carried my entire life in it. And though they didn't know it yet, it was the beginning of their collapse and the start of my freedom. Here at Revenge Bible, we explore real psychological stories of betrayal and justice. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss our next emotional reckoning. Oh, and don't be so sure you know the rest of my story, because what came after that is where our story really begins. Before that Thanksgiving night, my life wasn't dramatic. It wasn't glamorous either. It was predictable, comfortably predictable, in a way that made me forget how much quiet harm can hide inside routine. I woke up every morning at 6:10 a.m. Not 6, not 6:15. Somehow, 6:10 always felt like a compromise between discipline and mercy. I'd start the day with a cup of peppermint tea, my one ritual that belonged entirely to me, and then I'd get dressed for my shift at the medical clinic. Beige scrubs, soft sneakers, hair pinned back, a uniform that made me blend into the background of other people's emergencies. I liked my job. That surprises people sometimes, but it's true. I liked the small humanity in it. The nervous patients asking if their insurance would cover something, the elderly woman who always wore lavender perfume, the quiet chaos of doctors who never slowed down. It wasn't glamorous, but it made sense. It had structure, purpose, predictability. At home, nothing made sense. I lived with my parents not because I couldn't afford to move, but because they said I shouldn't. They insisted it was practical and good for the family. Though every month I paid the rent, the utilities, the groceries, and eventually even my sister's car payment. They said I was being helpful. I told myself it was temporary. Temporary lasted 5 years. Still, it's important that you know this. I wasn't miserable. I wasn't trapped in the way you see in movies. I was simply conditioned to carry things without noticing the weight. My sister, Bella, lived like the world was padded just for her. She was 22, chronically jobless, and treated responsibility the way most people treat wasps, with fear, avoidance, and a hope someone else would take care of it. My parents allowed it because they said she was sensitive. They never used that word for me. Growing up, they always told me I was mature, level-headed, naturally responsible. What I didn't realize was that all those compliments were simply prettier ways of calling me useful. Our house looked like a magazine spread. Open layout, neutral tones, seasonal decor my mother rotated with almost religious commitment. But emotional warmth, that was rare. Conversations were often logistical, like, what time is your shift? Can you pick up groceries? The bill is due. Can you handle it? If I ever said I was tired, my mother would tilt her head and say, Riley, life is tiring for everyone. Just be grateful you have a job. If I ever hinted that Bella should help out, my father would sigh in that heavy, disappointed way that makes you feel like you've failed an exam you didn't know you were taking. So I stayed quiet. I paid. I contributed. I filled in the invisible gaps, and I convinced myself that this was what being a good daughter looked like. On weekends, while Bella slept until noon and my parents watched shows they complained about but never missed, I would sit by my bedroom window with a journal. Not to write feelings, those were hard to admit even to myself, but to list all the things I needed to do to keep the house from collapsing. Groceries, laundry, budget, car maintenance, bills. My handwriting filled page after page with responsibilities that didn't truly belong to me. I think I knew deep down that something was wrong. But when you grow up being praised for your strength, it's easy to confuse exploitation with purpose. Work was my escape, even though it was exhausting. At least there people said, thank you. At least there I mattered in a way that didn't drain me. My coworker Ava used to tell me, you give too much to people who don't know how to give back. She didn't say it critically, just gently, like someone placing a blanket over a wound. She was right. But at the time, I wasn't ready to see it. The emotional tone at home was always muted. Not openly abusive, not dangerous, just quietly corrosive. My parents weren't villains. They weren't cruel. They were simply people who believed that love meant loyalty, and loyalty meant sacrifice, and sacrifice should come from the person most capable of giving it. And according to them, that person was always me. There were small moments, barely noticeable then, that now feel like hints, red flags, warnings I should have paid attention to. Like the time my mother asked why I never planned vacations when we need you here. Or when my father joked in front of relatives, Riley's practically the second parent in this house. Everyone laughed. I smiled too, because that's what you do when the truth stings. Still, I held on to the idea that things would change, that Bella would grow up, that my parents would eventually stop leaning on me, that all of this would balance out when they finally realized how much I contributed. But life doesn't hand out gratitude like participation medals, especially not from people who benefit from your silence. Looking back, I see that the signs of my breaking point weren't dramatic. They were subtle. A late night sigh too long, a grocery receipt too high, a shift at work too heavy, a journal entry that read simply, "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." But I kept going until Thanksgiving night, when the quiet cracks in my life finally split open.
Thanksgiving and our house had always been a performance. My mother insisted on it. Matching tableware, carefully folded napkins, candles that smelled like cinnamon and false harmony. I used to find comfort in the arrangement, the order, the predictability. But that year, everything felt heavier. The air was too warm, the lights too dim, the silence too expectant, as if the house itself knew what was coming long before I did. I got home late from my shift. Holidays at a clinic are always unpredictable. Last-minute fevers, medication refills, people who get sick from stress and too much togetherness. I was tired, still in my scrubs, but my mother didn't ask how my day went. She never really did. Instead, she said, "Hurry, we're waiting," in the tone of someone talking to a child who's late to class. I changed quickly and went downstairs, smoothing my hair, forcing a smile that felt thin. My father was already seated at the head of the table. Bella was on her phone, scrolling through pictures of people who lived far easier lives than mine. The turkey sat untouched, perfectly golden, like a centerpiece for a piece that didn't exist. When I sat down, my mother poured herself another glass of wine. "You're late," she said softly. Not angry, just disappointed enough to push a small knife under my skin. "I had to stay past my shift," I replied. "We were short-staffed." My father didn't look up. "You should manage your time better." The irony sat between us like another dish on the table. We made it through maybe 5 minutes of small talk, the kind where no one listens, but everyone goes through the motions. And then something shifted. My father set down his fork with a deliberate calm, the sound far louder than it should have been. Bella stopped scrolling. My mother's eyes slid toward me with the kind of rehearsed sympathy she used whenever she needed me to agree to something unreasonable. I remember thinking, something is coming. Brace yourself. But I didn't brace enough. My father cleared his throat. "Riley," he began, "there's something we need to talk about." The room stilled. Even the candles flicker less. "You have been carrying the family responsibilities well," he said. "Very well. We're proud of you." Some people might have taken that as praise. To me, it sounded like preparation. My mother leaned forward. "Your sister has a different path. She's meant to live, explore, find her passion." Bella smiled softly, like this was a script she'd already memorized. "You," my father continued, "have always been the stable one, the reliable one, and we need you to continue supporting the household financially." There it was. Not surprising, not new, just suddenly spoken out loud. But it didn't end there. My father took a sip of water, set the glass down, and looked at me with calmness that felt like betrayal dressed in silk. "Your job is to work while your sister enjoys life." The words didn't hit all at once. They landed in stages, almost politely. I felt something inside me tilt. Not break, but shift, like the beginning of an earthquake. I tried to swallow, but the room felt too quiet, too observant. My voice came out soft. What does that mean exactly?" My mother offered the kind of smile people use to soften a blow they don't think is a blow at all. "It means you focus on providing stability. Bella needs time to figure herself out." "I'm 22, Bella added, shrugging. "I shouldn't have to rush." "And I should?" I asked. My father's reply was instant. "You're older. It's different." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized he didn't see me as an adult with dreams or a life. He saw me as a resource, a living, breathing safety net, the person who would absorb the cost of everyone else's freedom. My mother reached for the serving spoon like the conversation was already settled. "Let's not make this dramatic, Riley," she said. "It's just how families work. Everyone contributes in their own way." "Some of us more than others," I said quietly. My father's expression hardened just a fraction. "If you don't like your role in this family," he said, voice low, steady, unshakable, "there's the door." The sentence hung in the air, suspended, echoing. Bella didn't look shocked. She looked relieved, like she'd been waiting for someone to say it out loud so her guilt could shrink. My mother exhaled, almost disappointed by my hesitation. "We're just asking you to keep the family functioning." I stared at the table, that perfect, polished table, and felt years of my life folding into each other. All the bills I'd paid, all the shifts I'd covered, all the excuses I'd made for them, all the gratitude I never received, and the quiet understanding I was supposed to continue indefinitely. Something inside me finally exhaled. Not anger, not resentment, just the truth I had ignored far too long. My father leaned back, confident in his ultimatum. "So," he said, "do you understand what we're saying?" I did, and for the first time in my life, I understood myself even more. I set down my fork, and I said, "Fine." They thought fine meant obedience. They didn't know it was the sound of a door unlocking, inside me first, then in the real world. Everything after that moment was inevitable.
I don't remember the exact moment my knees gave out. I just remember the sound, this thin, cracked whisper leaving my throat as if someone else was speaking for me. The world didn't explode or shatter dramatically. Instead, it folded inward, quietly and cruelly, like paper collapsing under rain. Maybe heartbreak doesn't come like thunder. Maybe it comes like silence. I sat in my bedroom long after the house had quieted. The dim glow of my bedside lamp painted shadows across the walls, making everything feel smaller, heavier, as if the room itself were pressing in. I kept thinking over the conversation from Thanksgiving. The words my father had said, my mother's gentle nods, and Bella's smug little smile. It all looped in my mind like a song I could not stop humming. Was this really my life? Was it always going to be this way? Always giving, always sacrificing, always being the invisible backbone while everyone else got to breathe? Had I let it go this far without noticing the weight? I remembered the stacks of bills I'd been paying, the groceries, the utilities, even Bella's car insurance. Did they ever stop to think about what it cost me? Not just in money, but in hours, in dreams, in my own energy. Did they even care that I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and slowly losing pieces of myself? Tears came again, unexpected, uninvited. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to stop them, but it was useless. Every sob, every shaky breath reminded me of how alone I had been, even surrounded by people who were supposed to love me. Could love really look like this? Could it be measured in debt payments and self-sacrifice while the loved ones lived without consequence? I pulled out my journal, the pages heavy with notes, reminders, and quiet thoughts I had written to myself over the years. As I flipped through them, I saw a timeline of my life, a history of service, of bending, of giving until my back ached. Did they know I had dreams too? Did they know I had hopes and ambitions that were quietly suffocated under the guise of duty? I asked myself questions I didn't want the answers to.
Was I always going to be the responsible one? Was I destined to live for others and never for myself? Did my existence only matter in terms of what I could provide? The more I thought, the more the hurt twisted into anger. Not the kind of anger that yells or destroys, but a deep, gnawing awareness that I had been taken for granted, manipulated and used. Could they really look at me and not see me as a person? Could they really be so blind, so entitled, that they thought I existed solely to prop up someone else's life? I sank to the floor, hugging my knees. My chest felt tight, as if all the grief, frustration, and betrayal were a solid weight pressing down on me. I let myself cry fully, letting the heartbreak pour out in long, shuddering waves. Was it supposed to feel like this? Was it normal to feel so small, so diminished, so invisible? And then, somewhere in the middle of the despair, a tiny flicker of clarity appeared. I realized that the way I had been treated was not a reflection of my worth, but of their limitations. Their selfishness, their unwillingness to see me as an equal. The problem was theirs, not mine. Wasn't it? Couldn't it be? I wiped my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The person staring back looked tired. Yes, broken even, but also raw and real. A human who had carried far too much, yet still had the capacity to rise. Could I take back control? Could I reclaim the life that had been quietly stolen from me? I didn't know yet. But for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine it. The quiet of the room became my accomplice. I felt grief, yes, but also a pulse of determination. Anger no longer consumed me, it sharpened me. And in that stillness, I made the first unspoken decision. I wouldn't stay down. I wouldn't let them define me. I would find a way forward. And though the tears continued to fall, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A small, steady spark of hope. A sense that perhaps I could turn all of this, betrayal, heartbreak, exhaustion, into something I could use. Something that would be mine, finally. After the crying stopped, and the hollow ache in my chest settled into a low, steady pulse, I realized something crucial. Grief alone wouldn't fix anything. Anger alone wouldn't fix anything. If I wanted change, I had to think. I had to plan. I had to act. I sat at my desk, journal open, laptop humming softly. The room was dim. Only the glow of my desk lamp illuminating stacks of papers and receipts that told the story of years of unpaid gratitude. I began to make a list, not of blame, not of revenge in the vengeful sense, but of facts. Bills I'd been paying, utilities in my name, the lease, car payments, insurance, groceries, every financial tie, every responsibility, every invisible chain. I wrote meticulously. I highlighted deadlines, overlapping payments, points of leverage. For the first time, I looked at these numbers not as burdens, but as tools. Could I wondered, use what they relied on so heavily to reclaim my life? Then came the research. Late nights hunched over my laptop, searching articles, forums, legal guides. I didn't need malicious tricks. I needed clarity, leverage, and security. I had to know my options, financial, legal, emotional, before I made a move. Every keystroke made the fog in my mind lift just a little. I reached out to 2 allies I trusted implicitly. Ava, my coworker, the one who had gently warned me for years about overextending myself, offered both moral support and practical advice. She helped me organize documents, suggested legal consultations, and reminded me that boundaries were not betrayal, they were survival. Then there was Jordan, my longtime friend and part-time legal assistant. He was sharp, discreet, and unflinchingly honest. Jordan helped me understand the exact points where my parents and sister depended on me and where they could falter without me. I began drafting scenarios. What if I left? What if I transferred utilities into my own name? What if I paused payments for bills that were technically under my responsibility? Each option carried risk, yes, but also potential. My thoughts circled around 2 central ideas: control and independence. I didn't want chaos. I wanted balance. I wanted justice that felt inevitable, like a slow-moving tide, rather than a storm. Late at night, I practiced conversations in my bedroom. I imagined the calm tone I would use when telling my parents that I would no longer carry the household's financial weight. I rehearsed my words over and over, precise but gentle. No shouting, no tears, just clarity. I'm done supporting your lifestyle. I'm done sacrificing my life for someone else's comfort. If you want me to stay, you need to respect me as an equal. I repeated it until I could say it without my throat tightening. I also considered contingencies. Could my parents react with anger, with guilt tripping, with passive aggression? Of course. I noted every potential response, every manipulation tactic they might attempt, and wrote down calm, composed ways to counter each one. I reminded myself repeatedly, calm is power. Silence is strategy. Reflection is armor. There were moments when the plan seemed too simple. Could it really work? Could I really walk away and force them to face the consequences of depending on me? Questions like this gnawed at the edges of my confidence. But every time I doubted, I returned to the facts, to the ledgers, the leases, the unpaid bills. The reality was undeniable. They had relied on me for far too long. And now, for the first time, that reliance could be a leverage point. I visualized the moment I would finally confront them, not with rage, but with composure. How they would lean back, confident, expecting compliance. How I would simply state my terms, and how they would feel the weight of their own dependence for the first time. And quietly, but irrevocably, I would reclaim the life that had been slipping through my fingers for years. By the time dawn crept into my room, I had a full, precise map. Every bill, every payment, every contingency, every ally, every step in the strategy. My heart still ached from betrayal, but it was now accompanied by focus, clarity, and purpose. And in that still, quiet morning light, I whispered to myself, this isn't revenge. This is reclaiming what was mine all along. If you're drawn to stories where calm turns to power, stay with us. Subscribe to Revenge Bible for more tales of justice served quietly.
The morning I decided to act, I woke earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen, and the house was still wrapped in the soft hum of quiet that comes before everyone else starts their day. I made a cup of herbal tea,
Not to calm nerves, though it did, but to give myself a moment to feel the weight of control finally settling in my hands. Today would be different. Today, I wouldn't just react, I would execute. I started with the bills. Every account in my name, utilities, rent, groceries, car insurance, was systematically reviewed. I double-checked the dates, confirmed balances, and ensured I had every detail stored and backed up. There was no malice in what I was about to do, only fairness. I was reclaiming my energy, my finances, my autonomy. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had depended on me for years, and now the very structures they had taken for granted would quietly hold them accountable. Next, I drafted a letter to my parents. Not accusatory, not bitter, just factual, precise, and calm. I have been the sole financial support for this household for years. I will no longer be responsible for your bills, your utilities, or your expenses. If you wish for me to remain living here, this will change immediately. I left space for signature, not as a threat, but as an acknowledgement that the responsibility they had assumed would now require their active participation. Before delivering the letter, I took one more step: documentation. I printed every bill, every receipt, every message that proved that I had been the one keeping the house afloat, not to shame them, but to protect myself from any false claims. I needed clarity, transparency, and control, not chaos. Then came the hardest part, the conversation itself. I walked into the kitchen, the letter in one hand, my tea in the other. The table looked the same as it always had, perfectly set, polished, familiar. But the atmosphere was charged in a way only quiet intensity can create. "Riley," my father said, sensing something in my posture, "what's this?" I set the tea down, slowly, deliberately. I slid the letter across the table. "Read it," I said. My mother picked it up first. Her eyes scanned, widened slightly, then narrowed. Bella leaned forward, phone now forgotten. I didn't apologize. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I spoke clearly, with calm conviction. I have been the sole financial support for this household for years. I will no longer be responsible for your bills, your utilities, or your expenses. If you wish for me to remain living here, this will change immediately. There was a beat of silence, heavy and almost sacred. I could see the disbelief settling on their faces like dust in sunlight. For once, they weren't guiding the conversation. They were reacting, and that reaction was proof of the power I held. I continued. I will continue to live here, but only if responsibilities are shared equally. Otherwise, I will leave, and every bill, every payment, every responsibility will fall to you, as it should. The moment stretched. My father opened his mouth, closed it, exhaled. My mother's hand shook slightly as she held the letter. Bella didn't speak at all. And then, slowly, the cracks began to show. The family dynamic they had relied on for years, the silent exploitation, the unspoken expectations, began to fracture. I watched as they realized quietly that my departure was not dramatics, it was inevitability. Every bill I had been paying, every task I had been completing depended on me. Remove me, and suddenly the fantasy of effortless family life became reality. Work, responsibility, consequences. My calm precision had done what words and anger could never do. The reality of dependence hit harder than any argument could. Their entitled reliance, their assumption that I would always sacrifice, unraveled in silence, in paperwork, in logistics. And for me, the poetic satisfaction was not cruelty, it was justice. I did not raise my voice. I did not gloat. I simply sat back, took a sip of tea,
and let them face the consequences of their own choices. I left the house that later morning, not dramatically, not angrily, but with clarity. Every step was deliberate. Every movement was proof that I was finally in control. I moved into a small apartment, all my own, with a sense of purpose and ownership I had never known. For weeks afterwards, I monitored accounts carefully, not out of spite, but to ensure fairness and accountability. Bills were being paid properly, shared equally, responsibilities distributed. And each time a payment bounced or a task went uncompleted, I felt only quiet affirmation. I had done what I needed to do, morally, ethically, and with integrity.
This wasn't revenge in the sense of malice. It was the power of reclaiming what had been mine, of turning betrayal into clarity, of walking away with dignity while letting consequences follow naturally. By the time the first month had passed, I felt lighter, freed, energized. Every aspect of my life, previously constricted by the invisible chains of obligation, now moved under my own control. The lessons of years of exploitation had been transformed into strategy, courage, and empowerment. And for the first time in a very long time, I smiled at myself in the mirror without shame, without guilt, and without exhaustion. I had taken back what was mine, not by breaking them, but by breaking free. Months have passed since I walked out that door, and the weight I carried for years feels almost like a memory now, faded, distant, but undeniably instructive. I've learned that freedom isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, deliberate, a decision whispered to yourself before anyone else even notices. I moved into a small apartment, not because it was extravagant, but because it was mine. The first morning, sunlight spilled across my living room, warm and unjudging, and I realized I could make choices for myself without asking permission, without guilt. For the first time, I didn't have to justify my existence by how much I could provide for someone else. The sense of peace didn't arrive at all at once. At first, I wrestled with guilt, with lingering doubt. Did I overstep? Was I being selfish? Then I remembered the quiet truth. Self-preservation is not selfish. Protecting your life, your dreams, your dignity is not betrayal. And in embracing that truth, I found strength. My parents and Bella eventually had to adjust. They learned that life without me carrying everything wasn't impossible. It was just theirs to manage. There were consequences, yes, and I didn't intervene. That wasn't revenge. That was justice. I had given years of myself freely. It was time for them to feel the weight they had asked me to bear. I realized something even more important. Revenge doesn't need to be dramatic, cruel, or public. True revenge is reclamation. It is calm. It is strategy. It is showing the people who underestimated you that your life is yours to live and that the power they thought they held was never truly theirs to claim. I reconnected with myself slowly, intentionally. Weekends are for walks in the park, mornings for tea and journaling, evenings for quiet reflection. I nurture relationships that nourish me instead of drain me. I pursue small pleasures without guilt. I work because I love what I do, not because someone else dictates it. Every step forward is a reminder that betrayal does not have the final say. I've learned to forgive, not necessarily them, not yet, but myself, for staying too long, for giving too much, for believing their version of love. Forgiveness for myself allows me to reclaim my narrative, and with that narrative comes freedom. And now, when I look in the mirror, I see more than a survivor. I see a strategist, a woman who took pain and turned it into purpose, betrayal and turned it into power. I see a human capable of boundaries, capable of clarity, capable of peace. Because the end of one chapter is not dictated by those who betray you. The end is yours to write. I sip my tea and smile softly. The quiet, steady triumph is all mine. Here at Revenge Bible, we turn pain into purpose and betrayal into balance. Subscribe and join us for the next transformation.